What's happening, everybody? Welcome into a brand new episode of Crossed Up. I'm Bob Wankel. Anthony Sanfilippo's here. Anthony, Philly's coming off a weekend against the Atlanta Braves over the holiday weekend, 4-game series. We last talked following the opener, bad start, a little bit of a rebound for the Phils down there in Atlanta over the final 3 games, take 2 out of the final 3, split the series. And we had an extra day to digest it. Obviously, we're recording here ahead of this Mets series on a Tuesday morning. Took Memorial Day off. So I think we've had a little bit of time to let things marinate a little bit. And I guess with that said, how do you look at what transpired in Atlanta? Do you say pretty good? That's a nice little split. Or do you feel like they left some meat on the bone? Or how do you take it?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it and say that, there was a lot to like about the 4 games in total. I guess my biggest complaint is that it just seems like now we're at the point where whenever the 5th spot comes up in the rotation, it's what Doc Rivers used to call a scheduled loss. I mean, it really is at this point with the Phillies. I mean, there was no shot, and we knew it going in. There was no shot Sunday night. I think everybody in the world knew it because even the broadcast, the national broadcast of that game, Sunday Night Baseball, they didn't even bother talking about the Phillies before the game or into the beginning of the game. Nothing. It was all Atlanta all the time, and rightfully so. I mean, normally you have a reason to complain to say, "Oh, looks like they're not talking about the Philadelphia team again." Well, guess what? There was no reason to talk about the Phillies Sunday night. Everybody knew that Strider was going to dominate Dylan Covey. And it was pretty damn ugly. But aside from that, really, I look at the series and say, not bad. I mean, they did a good job at the plate. They had nice approaches against the Braves pitching, put up some runs. So I think that has to bode well as you move forward going into this Mets series.
So I guess there are 2 ways to look at it, or there are 2 ways to look at it. If you would have told me before the series started that they would split, I'd say that's an acceptable outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I would certainly tell you it's an acceptable outcome the moment they lost the opening game. Like the Phillies forfeited any ability to win the series when they did not win the Aaron Nola start. Because as you said, we knew what was coming on Sunday night. And frankly, I was a little bit surprised. Like I obviously always take a look at the sport, at the sports books, the lines. And I see like Atlanta minus 265 on Sunday night. And if you know anything about sports betting, like you can catch a baseball game with a crazy disparity at 330 minus 360. And I know the Phillies get a little bit more credibility than a team that's 10, 15 games under 500. But my God, like when you just talk about a mismatch in terms of the pitching matchup, Atlanta had already lost 2 out of 3. That was probably the lock of the year, in at least in games that the Phillies have played. I mean, that game was a loss when you woke up on Sunday morning. And they do have a big problem on their hands here that they've got to figure out, and they've got to do it with some expediency. I will tell you that I too come away from the weekend and say, not bad. The only issue here is that you look up 53 games in or whatever it is, and you're still 6.5 games out. Now, Atlanta lost, I believe, last night to Oakland. At least they lost. They were losing in the 9th inning when I went to bed.
Unbelievable. Like, and I was going to just say, like, you want to talk about bad losses. How did
Yeah.
the Braves lose to the Oakland A's? Holy smokes. And not even close. It was 7-2 was the final.
Yeah. So, I mean, they actually, if you take the last 5 days, they gained half a game. So they're moving in the right direction. But you do have to view it a little bit when you dig yourself this type of hole, the way that they have at the start of the season. I do think if you're a fan and you're like, well, we just missed an opportunity to gain some ground, that's entirely fair. But, you trot out a guy like Dylan Covey at this point, and it cannot happen again. That cannot happen again.
But what do you do, Bob?
Well, that I think is probably the question of the day, and I'd like to tell you that I've had extra time to think about it, and I've come up with a great answer, but there isn't one, and I think that's glaringly obvious. I don't know what they do. I think you almost like, why not just go back to, at least for the interim, at least as a stopgap for another. I guess they go Saturday, I believe, will be the next time that the spot in the rotation comes up. And then I think that there might be a built-in day off or 2 where if they want to, I believe they can skip after that. So I think you have to go back. I mean, I know this is an unsustainable solution, but I think you just have to go back to Strom for 2, 3, and then try to piece it together that way. I mean, the way that they did it against Arizona where they actually got decent production. They didn't win the game, but they set it up in a somewhat favorable way. You open with Strom, and then I think you would just assess where you're at in the third inning. Like, do you go higher leverage relievers from there? Who's available? Or do you say, hey, we're down 3 runs. Now we'll go lower leverage guys and just get through this game. I mean, that is not a good solution, but it's better than, I mean, I don't want to pick on the guy because he turned out to be exactly what we thought he would be. And it's not even his fault, honestly. Like, you know what I mean? Like, It's not his fault. So I'm not going to sit here and dump on this guy, but if you're serious about winning, like that's got to be it for him. That's the last time he throws for them.
So you look at and looking ahead, and this is where you're right. So the next 3 starts that spot comes up in the rotation are all road games. Saturday at Washington, then you can skip a rotation because there's an off day. Then it would be a game in Arizona, and then the last game in Oakland. So when you look at it, you're not. I mean,
where does that get you on the calendar?
That gets you to Father's Day. That's Oakland game is Father's Day. So it's like, can you kind of get away? I mean, Washington's not great. I mean, they're probably a little bit better than I think people thought they were going to be, but they're still not great.
Yeah, they're competitive.
Arizona, he already pitched well against Arizona for 4 innings. And then Oakland's the worst team in the history of baseball. So like, can you get away with it for 3 more starts before you have to worry about it? Then it would come up again against the Mets in Philly at the end of June. That would be the next time that you would look at it and say, okay, we cannot have that happen again there.
Right.
So you got 3 more starts where you can kind of tinker, I think, before you really have to make a decision on what you really want to do in that Mets game.
And we talked a lot last week about how do you fix the Phillies? Do you get into the trade market? At what point does the trade market really begin to percolate a little bit? Like, I think it's still too early. I mean, it's May 30th. I just don't think that they're going to be in a position to be able to engage another team in a meaningful trade at this point with any type of value in play. I mean, it would be a massive, massive overpay to get anybody to listen to you right now. So, they're probably going to have to piece it together, you know, and I know that everyone looks at it. And this is one of the conversations I engaged in on Sunday night. People are talking about the lack of depth. And I say, you're right. I mean, the fact that they have to do this, the fact that they had to make that start in a game that they could have won an important series on national TV, it's embarrassing. And when you talk about the payroll and the money that's invested in this team, the fact that they have to start a pitcher like Dylan Covey it is embarrassing and it's frustrating. But I'm not here to issue the Phillies a pass because I think there's a lot of things that you can be critical of. A lot of these offseason acquisitions have not panned out. There's been a lot of money spent. I think you can question how it's been spent, at least through, 50, whatever this has been. Where are we at? The 53 game mark right now or something close to it. I think you look at it and you say, you weren't banking on Andrew Painter getting hurt. You weren't banking on Bailey Falter being a disaster. You thought that a guy like in a worst case scenario that the Nick Nelsons and Christopher Sanchez's of the world would be there to take down these types of starts that we're talking about. Every team is going to get to a point in the season where they have to do something a little bit less than desirable. It's not going to unfold in a perfect way for them. And I thought that the Phillies are actually fairly well equipped to deal with it. I don't know how much of it is their fault that 2 of those guys are hurt. Falter fell off the face of the earth. Plasmeyer struggled. Like, I don't know. Do they deserve a pass, or can you be critical? Like, I think that's the question. Can you be critical that this is what they had to do, or is it understandable?
I think when you look around baseball, Bob, it's understandable. And I say that not to defend the Phillies, but rather there are a lot of teams, including good teams, who have problems with the 5 spot in the rotation or have had issues with their rotation. I mean, look what the Braves had to do against the.
I was going to say the same thing.
Look what they just threw against the Phillies, right? I mean, the 2 guys that they threw in the first 2 games of the series. Now, Schuster's a little bit more of a prospect, right? Could eventually become something, but nevertheless, those 2 lefties they've not been good this year in either the majors or really the minors for that matter. And the Braves have had to trot them out, right? So that there's every team has these these issues and these problems. So you can't sit there and blame the Phillies for not having the depth that was necessary, because I mean they thought that they had these guys, right? The same kind of these guys would be fine, and turns out that they weren't, or they got injured, and that became a real nightmare for them. The bigger problem at large here is that you could probably get away with being 1-9 in your number 5 spot in the rotation if the first 4 spots in the rotation had any kind of consistency as far as being good. And the fact of the matter is they didn't, right? They haven't. They've either been, you've had a couple of great starts, you've had a bunch of mediocre starts, and you've had several bad starts amongst those top 4 guys. And that's it. I mean, so if they were better in those games, you could probably sit there and go, yeah, all right, 1-9 sucks. Wish it was better than that. But man, we would still be better off if the rest of our rotation was doing its job.
Yeah, and I mean it's almost a perfect transition into the next point. I don't want to jump off the rails here and just go negative right away. I mean, back it up a day. And one of the things that this team has struggled with is, as you said, it's the guys that you're counting on to deliver have not delivered consistently. And there've been very few instances this season where you have your premium talents like I'm putting you guys on my back and I'm winning this game. And that's what, in a way, you look at Saturday's game and it was somewhat frustrating. They go 1 for 9 with runners in scoring position again. They had multiple chances to break the game open, but this was an instance of Zach Wheeler being one of the best pitchers in baseball, pitching like it. There was no bad luck. There were no broken bat singles. There was no, well, if you just eliminate the 1 inning or he lost it for that run of 5 batters, it was just, I'm better than you. This is a huge game for my team and I'm going to go out and deliver. And it was just so refreshing to see that type of performance in what I thought was a big spot, because if he does not throw that game for them on Saturday, they lose 3 out of 4. And then what are we talking about here? We're talking about them being 8-9 games out. It was a disastrous weekend. Is this team even going to be able to compete? Like, we would come on and at least have to address those issues. Whether or not they're an overreaction doesn't really matter. It's at least a talking point. Zach Wheeler really provided the Phillies some stability in a spot that they desperately needed it, especially knowing what was coming the next night.
He did, and it was the best start of any Phillies pitcher this season. It was probably the best start by any Phillies pitcher since Nola clinching the playoff spot last year. I mean, even that was a better performance than anything that they got in the playoffs, and they had some good starts in the playoffs, right? From Suarez and Wheeler and the like. That's how good that start was on Saturday night, especially because it came against a very good Atlanta Braves lineup. And if nothing else, you saw this weekend just how good the Braves lineup is, right? I mean, as well as the Phillies hit against them, the Braves lineup is legitimately one of the best in the last decade, right? I mean, top to bottom, that lineup is really good. And Wheeler just he had them swinging it at everything. They couldn't stop chasing his pitches. He was blowing balls by him. 12 strikeouts. I mean, that was as dominant a performance as I've seen somebody have in this town in a long, long time. So it was a really good effort. It was really needed because they obviously needed to burn the bullpen on Sunday. So yeah, it was good. It was good in that from that perspective. So yes. Now the question is, can he now pick that up and keep going? Not to say that he has to throw 8 shutout innings every time he comes out, but can he keep that kind of consistency of being, Zach Wheeler now going forward? The hope is he can. And then you need Nola to kind of shake off the Atlanta game, which was not a good start, and kind of go back to his previous few starts, which were better, and get back going on that train. If he can, okay, fine. And then you got to get Ranger Suarez, who pitches tonight. He's got to have a good game tonight. You want to talk about somebody who needs a good game? Ranger Schwarber.
Yeah, I mean, these games are all big. Phillies, Mets, both teams are within an arm's length of one another in the division. They've kind of been just flipping back and forth here over the last past couple of weeks. And so we know it's a big start for Ranger Suarez. He comes in, ERA is over 9. He's been very shaky. Looks like he's maybe been a little bit too fine with some of his pitches, but he's been too heavy in the middle of the plate. It's been a struggle. And I wonder at what point we've talked about this previously. When do you start to hit the panic button with him? When do you start to say, "Uh-oh, how much longer can we afford to go through the turns in the rotation with him being a part of it?" Now, I think that you look at the bigger picture with what they're dealing with already and the lack of depth, that he's going to be afforded a very lengthy run here, probably longer than he otherwise would have been in a more normal situation. So I don't think that he's pitching for his job tonight. I don't think we're there yet, but I do wonder, like, is it 2-3 more starts of this? Is it 6-7 starts where he's completely ineffective, where you just say, we cannot do this anymore? So this is a big start. And it was interesting. I talked to somebody within the organization. I don't want to go into any greater detail than that, but I said, what are you seeing here? And it was, the response was, I'm stunned. When you looked at his minor league rehab starts, obviously these are two totally different things, pitching at the major league level, pitching at the minor league level, but just the efficiency, his command was pretty good. He was sharp. I mean, they were actually at one point a little bit frustrated that he wasn't able to get stretched out in game the way that they wanted him to, because he was so efficient with his pitches. And so you expect a little bit of a slow start, but this has been surprising, not just to people like you and I, but I think people internally as well. So I don't know that there's concern there, but I think that there's certainly some surprise.
Yeah, I'm surprised too. It's interesting when you look at the starts, and they haven't been good, but there have been moments in the starts that have progressively seemed a little bit more like the Ranger we expected. And you knock out the first one. I think that's a shake your rust off kind of start. Then the second one, that's the game where he had that crazy inning where he gave up 6 consecutive base runners and then struck out the side before getting pulled.
Yeah.
So at least you sit there and say, okay, well, he was able to find it, right? I mean, he had to get pulled because he threw so many pitches. He was at 66 pitches through 2 innings. So they had to pull him at that point because of the workload. And then you sit there and go look at the next start and say, again, he had moments, same thing, like where he got cruise through a couple innings, and all of a sudden it was like meltdown time again. So yeah. It's weird, and I think that's where the surprise comes in, because we know who Ranger Suarez is. We know he's not affected by the moment in any stretch of the imagination. He doesn't get too high, he doesn't get too low. So it really kind of surprises you that he's a little all over the place with the way he's pitched. And so I don't know. Is that something that he can just rein in? They don't think it's anything mechanical. They don't think it's anything physical. They just think it's something that it's been a couple bad outings, and okay, fine, but you can't keep having bad outing after bad outing after bad outing. You got to get one right at some point. Otherwise, then the concern is legit.
Yeah. Actually, just to kind of finish the thought, because I want to dive a little bit more into this Mets series. We're a day removed from the Atlanta series. We've kind of said most of what needs to be said about it. Just 2 quick little items, actually. One, I know that there is this sense that the Phillies actually they peppered Braves pitching. They were showing some signs of life offensively. I know they got to Strider a little bit on Sunday night once the game was non-competitive, and that's great. You know what they were with runners in scoring position again this weekend? 4 games.
Brutal.
And 5 for 30.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. So like that problem's not going away. And I just don't have it in me, because most of our listeners are loyal listeners. I just cannot do the runners in scoring position rant. And I would love to do another Trey Turner rant. And like, as bad as Dylan Covey was on Sunday night, hey man, how about the shortstop doesn't, bury you as well with the misplays early. But I think for the sake of freshness, why don't we table those conversations?
Yeah.
You look at
just want to point out though, you mentioned 5 for 30. I think 3 of those hits were in Friday night.
Yeah.
I think they were 3 for 11 Friday. So just that meant that they had 2 hits in the other.
Yeah, I mean, Saturday was especially bad. I believe it was 1 for 9 Saturday. Sunday night they didn't do much with runners in scoring position. It's just so bad.
Yeah.
All right, so I look at this, and you're talking, and we're going through the rotation, and here's a positive that I think is sort of flown under the radar a little bit, and it's Taijuan Walker.
Yeah.
And we've expressed a lot of concern about him at various points, just the lack of consistency. And I hate giving stats, and I hate saying, well, over his last 5 starts, he's done this if you exclude this one thing, like, because that thing happened. So it's a little bit deceptive to do it. But I will just say this. The thing that I liked about him against the Braves on Friday night was that he wasn't great. Like, it wasn't like, oh man, he's on tonight, look at him go. He had to kind of grind his way through that start. And you talked about the Braves being such a good offense. He gets deep into the game. He scatters 10 hits. He doesn't have that blow up that he's had so many times this season. Like, that's what I liked about it. It's obviously great to see him go out and throw 6 shutout innings. He's done that a couple times. He's had these really encouraging starts where you say, like, maybe he's turning the corner. But I kind of like the fact that he wasn't great. He wasn't clean, still gave them some length, and kind of just figured it out, gutted his way through a start. And to me, that was really encouraging. And you look at this now, and I'm going to do exactly what I said I don't like, but last 5 starts, the Phillies are 4-1. And in those 4 starts, like the one is the blow up against the Giants, but you take that away and you remove it and you say, okay, the 4 other starts, Phillies are 4-0. He's pitched 24 innings in those 4 starts. He's only allowed 8 earned runs, 22 hits, 4 walks. Like, he hasn't been lights out. He hasn't been sensational, but he's been exactly what you thought Taijuan Walker was going to be.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at this rotation and just what a disaster it is, or maybe that's too strong, but certainly how much uncertainty there is with this rotation. When you start to see some of these trends develop, you go, okay, like I can at least latch onto that and start to feel a little bit better about at least this one part of it.
Yeah, I mean, and it would be nice for the Phillies if these guys were all doing this at the same time. We're all being who you expected them to be at the same time. Because if they're all who you expected them to be, then the Phillies can get on a run. Mm-hmm. The fact of the matter is that we had a couple of good starts out of Nola, but the other guys weren't good. Then Nola goes south against the Braves, and Wheeler and Walker are good, but Suarez still isn't there, and your number 5 spot still isn't good. So that's what I'm saying. Like, they've just been erratic to the point where you don't have consistency through the rotation. And you're right to point out how Taijuan Walker has pitched. He's been pretty good in 4 out of 5 starts. I mean, really, look, pitchers are going to have bad starts every once in a while. It happens. Even the best pitchers have a game where it's not great. And Walker had one of those games. Unfortunately for him, it came at a time when he was coming off of a few other not good starts. And so therefore we were especially concerned about him. But he has 4 out of the last 5 been pretty solid. So you got to sit there and say, okay, maybe Taijuan Walker is Taijuan Walker now. And that's okay. That's a good thing for the Phillies. We don't need him to be more than Taijuan Walker. We just need him to be himself. But that's saying that the other guys just need to be themselves too. Because if they are, then okay, fine. If they're not, though, then we need hero moments. And when you're relying on hero moments out of guys who you really can't expect them to be heroes other than once in a blue moon, that's when it becomes a concern. So you're right. You're right to point it out. It's good stuff. But everybody else starts to need to do what he's doing as well and be themselves.
So every series is a big series. We sit on this show every week and say, oh, this is a big one for the Phillies. They have an opportunity to take advantage of a bad opponent, or this is an opportunity for them to rise up against a quality opponent. Well, here we are. And I would actually tell you that beyond the obvious, this is a big series for the Phillies. And we can talk about the obvious, and I think we need to. But I just want to point this out. We talk about the Joe Girardi Phillies, the 2022 start, how bad it was. 21-29 was the low point through 50 games. They fire Girardi, I believe, at 21-28. They lose one more with Rob, and then they go on this run. Well, here we are now. Phillies come into this series against the Mets at 25-28. If they lose tonight, that puts them at 25-29, which is exactly where they were after they completed the sweep against the Angels last season. So the 2023 Phillies will be even with the 2022 Phillies tonight with a loss. So you have Ranger Suarez out there. I believe it's Senga for the Mets. He's been good for them, a little erratic. He was really struggled with his command his last time out. I believe he's issued 8 walks his last 2 starts. He hasn't been lights out. He's been good. They have the opportunity, if Ranger Suarez gives them the type of start that he's capable of giving them, of getting this series off on the right foot, and then you go Nola Carrasco, I believe, in the second game. Correct. I'm just going to tell you straight up, they don't win enough Aaron Nola starts. And sometimes that's on the offense, sometimes that's on Aaron Nola. Like, this is one of these ones for me this week where when you look at what they have looming on Thursday, you better win Wednesday night. Aaron Nola better deliver on Wednesday night, especially on the heels of that start that we saw against the Braves. Like, it's time now. It's the end of May. It's the beginning of June. It's been 2 months. It's the pitch clock. It's getting acclimated. It's all of these things, learning to pitch with diminished velocity. Like, this to me is like a real checkpoint series for this team. Hey, Ranger Suarez, show me that you can do it. Do it now. And hey, Aaron Nola, like, you got to go out and give me like one of those vintage starts on Wednesday. This team needs this series. They really do. And I know that you can sit here and talk about Washington coming and Detroit after that. And like, you can talk about the schedule. Oh, it eases up. But then look ahead what comes after that. The Phillies are, for the next month, not going to see 2 weeks of bad baseball. Like, they're not going to just see 2 weeks of bad opponents consecutively. It elevates. You get the Dodgers again. You get the Diamondbacks again. I know the A's are in there at one point, but the opponents that they will see, it's like a tale of two extremes. It's either garbage or, it's the cream. So this is a truly, truly important series. It's time for this team to start making that march to 500 again and like surpass it. And if they lose this series, you're talking about being 4 under going, if that's just 2 out of 3, you're talking about being 4 under going into Washington. Like, this team has to make its move here at some point.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it, I would like to see them win this series. I think that they haven't. I mean, look, tonight's not. I wouldn't say tonight is a pitching matchup advantage. If Ranger Suarez was himself, I would say it would be, because to be honest with you, Kodai Senga has not been great. Not just his last couple starts, but I mean, I think his WHIP is 1.66 over his last 7 starts.
You know what that sounds like? That sounds like a lot of base runners. The ERA is not as bad as the WHIP, though. So what is he good at? Stranding base runner?
25 walks in 36 2/3 innings.
Yeah.
He was all over the place, right? I mean, so Philly's got to be patient with him, work him a little bit, like a lot like they did in what game was it that they had 7 walks for? Was that Friday night's game that they had 7 walks against the Braves? Like, so they need to have that kind of approach, right? And just get on base. But they definitely have the pitching matchup advantage on tomorrow with Nola against Carrasco. And then obviously you got Walker against Scherzer. And the closer, Scherzer's actually looked a little bit more like himself his last couple starts after, a couple of bad outings and then the sticky stuff ban and everything else. So it'll be interesting with Walker pitching against his former team too. Like, how does that kind of play into it as well? So, but yeah, you're right, Bob. I mean, this is an opportunity, because if you do want to look ahead and you say, well, they don't have a lot of stretch of bad teams coming, and they don't. Washington and Detroit notwithstanding, although both teams are a little bit better than maybe people thought, you could get on a bit of a run here, because you say, okay, let's win 2 out of 3 against the Mets. Yeah. And then you play Washington, and then you play Detroit, and it's like, okay, this could be a time to kind of get rolling in the right direction. And one thing I just want to say, this is a small little tangent, but not too far off of what you're saying. One of the things I keep hearing people talk about, and whether it's on talk radio or it's on social media, one of the things I keep hearing, that drives me a little nutty, is they're saying, well, with the new schedule, they're not going to play the Nationals 18 times like they did, or 19 times like they did last year. They got to play everybody in the league. They're only playing the Nationals 13 times this year. Well, that's true. But they're also playing the A's and the Kansas City Royals, and all these other bad teams from the bad American League teams as well. Doesn't that make up the difference? I think, to me, that's like the dumbest argument ever. So let's not use that and say, oh, well, they're not going to have the opportunity to just beat up on the Nationals this year. Well, no, they can, and they can beat up on the A's and the Tigers and the Royals and all these other bad teams too. So it can still happen. They just have to figure it out here, I think, against the Mets. It'd be nice to win 2 out of 3 in this series.
It would be, and I think that it is an opportunity to go on a little bit of a run. Like, so if you look at the next 9 games and you talk about Mets, Nationals, Tigers. The Tigers are at home. The first 6 games here are on the road. You win the series against the Mets. You expect to win the series in Washington. And I'm not going to predict sweeps. I'm certainly not going to predict them on the road. But then you come back and you get the Tigers and you just win these series. Win the next 3 series, 2 out of 3. Don't have to do anything crazy here. Then you have that little 6-3 stretch. You're back to 500. So 9 games from now, you're sitting at 500. Now, maybe there's a little bit more than that. Maybe they can get on a run. That's the one thing about this team. We talk about its inconsistency, and it's obviously flawed. But there's enough there, and we did see this last year where they can put together a 10-game stretch where they win 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10. Like they haven't really gotten hot, and they haven't really gotten hot together. And you just think even teams that underperform, even teams that are a little bit lackluster at times, like they all have it in them. This Phillies team is sort of due for one of those. So I do wonder if that's coming. And I also look at I look at the odds in these first 2 games. The Phillies the Mets tonight are minus 135 in this opener. Like they're at home. Senga's pretty good. Ranger Suarez has been a disaster. That line's short. That's a Phillies line tonight. The odds makers are telling you Phillies win that game tonight. And then they come back tomorrow and they're a minus 130 favorite with Noel on the mound. So there's an opportunity here. This is not Sunday night. This is not a setup where you go, well, not only do they have no chance, but I would actually tell you that they should win these games. Like I think they should win this series. And I've watched them through 53 games. Like I know all the reasons that they can't get hot. And I know all the reasons why they might not win this series, but I just feel like that it's time here now, guys. And we'll see what they do with it.
Yeah, I mean, what I've been saying about the Mets all along, right? I mean, I don't buy the Mets a little bit. I think the Mets are a 500 team, and they've played like it, and they've been it. And the funny thing is that I sit here and I crow about it, but I also say, well, I still believe the Phillies are better than a 500 team, and yet they are a couple games under 500, right? So maybe that's because we're around them, we see them on a daily basis. Maybe that's why we're a little bit more in tune in that belief with the Phillies. But from just from a little bit of a distance watching the Mets, I don't think that they're as good as they think they are, or as a lot of people think they should be. I think there's a lot of flaws there, especially the bullpen. That's the other thing. Like you look at a game like tonight, right, with Senga. Obviously, the guy's been struggling to throw strikes. So if you can get him to throw a lot of pitches and you get him out of a game early, and you get into that Mets bullpen, it's awful. I mean, it's not a good bullpen. There's not a lot to like in the New York bullpen. And to me, those are opportunities, right? You get Carrasco out of the game early because he's not a good pitcher. And you get into the bullpen again, really put the pressure on Scherzer in the 3rd game of the series to have to give you length, which that's the one thing he really hasn't been able to do quite yet with any kind of consistency or regularity. So those are the 3 things. Like if you could keep putting the pressure on them by getting their starters out of the game early, even if they don't score a ton of runs, but force them to throw a lot of pitches and get into that bullpen, there's opportunities galore against the Mets. I think it's there for the taking, and the Phillies just have to take it. And that's why it would be frustrating to me if they come home from this series without winning this series.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this right now. Reliever ERA. The Mets come into this 20th in baseball in bullpen ERA. I mean, that's
surprisingly high as far as I'm concerned, right? I mean, seriously, I don't look. If you look at that bullpen, who out there makes you go, oh yeah, that's a good bullpen. That's a good pitcher out in that bullpen.
I mean, listen, we spend a lot of time on the show. We do it twice a week. We're dedicated to it, and I always say our show, I don't really listen to other Phillies podcasts very often. I don't know what other shows do. I don't know if it's more projection, if it's more minor league stuff. It's more, I don't know. But what we do on this show is, what did we see? What do we see coming up in the short term? I feel like those are the 2 things that we kind of, that's how we do it. And I'm almost fatigued at this point. I'm fatigued only a third of the way into the season, because a lot of what we talk about is pretty much it just I don't want to say it's redundant because there's obviously new developments, new twists, new projections, and trying to make sense of it on the fly. I mean, that's what you do as as an observer of sports. But I'm at this point where I'm like, you know what? Like today, I'm like, well, how do we do this show? Do we talk about Kyle Schwarber now hitting 166? Like, do we do another dive into Kyle Schwarber? But like, you know what? To me, it comes down to this: hit with men on base. We can talk about how disjointed this lineup is. We can talk about the ebbs and flows of guys like Bryson Stott, now Bohm, and what do you think about Schwarber? Is this really what he's going to do all year? Is he going to hit 160 for them? This lineup, even when it struggles, is good enough to put pressure on opposing pitchers. They consistently do it. The reason that we talk about the runners in scoring position issue is because they consistently put runners in scoring position. They have to start cashing the checks. They have to start doing it with more frequency at a better rate. And if they can do it, they're going to get hot. Even with the fifth starter issues, even with some of the inconsistencies in the starting rotation, if this offense can just take a step forward with runners in scoring position. And you know what? Like one thing I'll say about Kevin Long, I mentioned this last week. People are like jumping into my DMs about Kevin Long and like, do you consider changing the hitting coach? And I say absolutely not. It's insane to even think about that right now. But one thing that he said, and I'll paraphrase a little bit, and you can correct me if I have this wrong, but when he was asked about this, he pointed to that one stretch where they had the 4 or 5 games and it was like 1 for 30. And he says, like, it's a small sample size. People are overreacting to this. And I would tell you that they're absolutely not overreacting. It's not a small sample size. It wasn't a 5-game stretch. It's been the entire season. Like they've got to bear down. And it's been disappointing to watch a lot of these veteran hitters that have some real talent, even when they're not hot, the consistent inability to do it. If they do that, they're going to get on a run here. And that is this offense in a nutshell. Like we can go through it one by one and itemize it, but like you've just got to deliver with runners in scoring position. How much longer can this go on?
And it doesn't even have to be great, Bob. That's the thing. Like they don't even have to be great at delivering with runners in scoring position. If they're just league average, how many more wins do they have right now? 3,
well, I don't
4?
want to go Marcus Hayes. If Rhys Hoskins was in the lineup, the Phillies would be in first place.
Well, no, but I'm just saying, like, I mean, in all honesty,
you could probably look at it and reasonably just say, give them another 3 wins if they were. If they could just be a little bit more timely with their hitting.
Just a little bit. If they're league average, they have 3 more wins. And it's a whole different conversation that we're having right now if they're have 3 more wins because they have a winning record at that point, right?
I mean, and there's something to this. We talk about the numbers with runners in scoring position. I've recited them frequently, the batting averages, the OPS. I've mentioned numerous times they don't hit home runs with runners in scoring position. They don't do damage. They don't slug with runners in scoring position. But it comes down to the fact that they're able to do it when runners aren't on. So it's not like that they do not possess the ability to slug. It's not that they possess the inability to get on base. It's that they just don't do it situationally. And I'll give you this. This is just a different way to frame it. Runners left in scoring position per game. So forget about your performance with runners in scoring position, but just the volume. They leave 3.85 runners in scoring position per game. And you say, well, what the hell does that even mean? It's the most in baseball. They leave more runners in scoring position per game than any other team in the sport. So we could talk about the batting average and, they only slug 320. And what does that mean? I'm just telling you, they leave more runners on base in scoring position than anyone else. Detroit has the second most, Toronto the third most, Washington. And here you go. Just hear me out here. Phillies, Tigers, Blue Jays, Nationals, Cubs, Reds. So that's 6 teams. Other than the Blue Jays, all of those teams are dreadful. They're bad teams. Like, and I think the Blue Jays are going through something similar here where you're like, yo, we're better than this. Yeah. The Blue Jays are ahead of the Phillies, but the Blue Jays have been a little bit underwhelming. Like, if you're both these teams, you're like, we have the pieces in our lineup. Everyone talks about the firepower that we have. If we just get a little bit more here, look at us.
And again, a little bit of a tangent. I'll tell you right now, just the way things are going in NL Central, as bad as they are, the Reds could be a team that's contending for that division title at the end of the season, unless Milwaukee figures it out, which I don't understand why they're as bad as they are. I know their lineup isn't great, but come on, man! Like in that division, they should be running away with it.
I mean, the Brewers lead the NL Central, and they have a negative 21 run differential. Like their expected win loss is 24 and 29.
Which is what the Reds record is. That's what I'm saying.
What the Reds record is, and also their expected win loss, and the Reds are minus 24. It's funny, like the Cubs are in contention to be the National League's worst team, at least in terms of record right now, and they're actually plus run differential. Like same thing with St. Louis. St. Louis has been a little bit better lately, like a little bit, because they got off to just such a bad start. But they're also positive run differential. The NL Central's goofy.
Yeah, it's
really weird.
It is weird. Speaking of weird, you mentioned Schwarber, and I wanted to bring up something to you that I don't know if I've ever seen in baseball. And look, I know it's ultimately a small sample, right? Because it's only 19 games. But I want to just point this out because this is craziness to me. Because you know how it's supposed to work versus batting average, on base percentage, slugging, and OPS. Like you understand the concept of it, so I don't have to explain it. But since they moved Kyle Schwarber down into the 5-hole in this lineup, it's been 19 games now, right? And he's had 80 plate appearances there. He's hitting 153, which is it's god awful. His on base percentage is 375. How do you have a 222 point jump in on base? His OPS is 850. So it actually is productive. Which
Isn't it amazing?
It's crazy to me.
Because like you know, sometimes like numbers, they don't line up with the eye test.
Yeah.
And he's been bad. I mean, if you look at his season, this has been underwhelming. 731 OPS.
Yeah.
Hitting 166. This is just, I'm not a batting average guy. Like, I don't need you to hit 320. But there's like a line. There is a line where I'd say, like, now it's getting kind of crazy. He's at it. 166. Coming to play with 166 batting average is not good. But you're right. Like, the numbers don't match up with the eye test. Because when I watch him, I go, he hasn't been that bad. Maybe it's because, I mean, you make a good point statistically, but I also, there's the home runs. I see the value of him as like a clubhouse guy. I like the dude, but.
Well, here's the thing, Bob. He's got 9 hits in those 80 plate appearances. Just 9. 6 of them are home runs. 1 double, 2 singles. He's got 2 singles in 19 games. I mean, it's crazy. This is a statistical line like I've never seen it. Like I said, it's only 19 games. It's only 80 plate appearances, but it's wild to me how it's working because you're right. He's walked 20 times in his last 80 plate appearances. 1 every 4 plate appearances he's walking.
Yeah, I mean, he's on pace right now at his current pace. He's on pace to walk 119 times this season.
Yeah.
And he's also on pace to strike out 199 times.
I mean,
I don't even care about that. If he's on pace. I mean, listen, these are his numbers. This is his current on pace projection.
Well,
15 doubles, no triples, 40 homers, 119 walks, 199 strikeouts.
Yeah. So I'm curious, and I'm going to have to look it up. And I didn't do this in advance because it kind of just dawned on me. But I do want to look it up, and it's a relatively easy look up through StatHead. But the number of guys who've had 100 walk seasons who've batted below 200, there can't be any. I really don't think that there's any. Like, in all honesty, that's what the whole thing is mind-boggling to me, that you could be this poor a hitter, like get hits, and still be both productive and get on base at a very good clip. I don't understand it. It just doesn't. It's baseball oddity that doesn't make any sense to me.
Does he hit 45 home runs this year?
That's tough to do. I mean, like you said, he's on pace for what, 40 right now?
He's on pace for 40, but he also, and and I know people are like, oh, the calendar hasn't turned to June yet. It's June Schwarber. Like that stuff drives me nuts. It's corny. But is he capable of going on a bender for 10 days and hitting 7 home runs in 10 days? Yes. And has he done that yet? No, he is not. So, could like right now, like with his 13 home runs to this point, I would say that this is a sustainable pace. Like his 40 home run pace is not an anomaly, and not just because he went crazy last year either. Like he hasn't gone on some crazy stretch here where these numbers are puffed up in terms of, oh, he's on pace for. So right. I look at it and say that there probably is a little bit more there. I would bet that he eclipses 40 home runs. I also, though, would not bet that he eclipses a 200 mark in batting average. I just don't. I think we're headed for like a 195, 45 home run season. This is going to be one of the all-time crazy stat lines.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like, it's fascinating to me that it's just fascinating to me. Like he is a statistical anomaly in the sport. Like, I don't know. I don't think it's possible. I'm trying to do the stat head thing as we're talking, because I really want to see if it's even possible to have a batting average below 200 and have over 100 walks. So so if there's anything, if you want to move on to something else, I'll just find this real quick.
I mean, listen, this show for me is kind of like if you're a fan, right? Like, it's just, how did you take in this series? And usually I come in, I have a plan, and I'm like, these are the 7 things I absolutely want to talk about. But I kind of just feel myself saying, show me more. I see your face. I know you probably have it here, but I'm going to seriously, before you get back to it, it's just like this weekend happened. I don't think you can be angry about it. I don't think you should be overly enthused about what happened. This series to me is the show me series. Like when we talk, I will be much more direct and much more assertive on Friday morning when we talk, because I think that this truly is where you at 2023 Phillies. I think we're embarking on that right now.
Yeah, I do. I do think this in a lot of ways, Bob, I do think this is more of a measuring stick for the Phillies than even the Atlanta series was, because this is a team that's in the same kind of boat that the Phillies are in right now.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think when you're looking at what the goal of the Phillies would be, it's to get into the playoffs. Like, can the Phillies at 6.5 games back of Atlanta win the division? I guess. I mean, yeah. I don't think so, but sure, can they? Mathematically, sure. It's within striking distance. But when you look at the wild card picture, and it's just that the National League's this jumbled mess, the Mets are a team that you should compete with. I too think the Phillies are better than the Mets. So win the series.
Yeah. By the way, just to give you the answer, it has happened once in the history of baseball, and not that long ago. It happened in 2021. Joey Gallo hit 199 and had 111 walks. It's the only time in the history of baseball that anybody's had a less than 200 batting average and still walked over 100 times.
So if he walks 120 times, hits 175, and finishes with 43 home runs, how do you view that season? I don't know. How do you, not about how you view it historically, but just,
I don't know.
Is that okay with you? Are you cool?
I don't know. I guess ultimately it depends on where the team is, right? Yeah. Ultimately, I guess look, if it helps if it gets the team into the playoffs and he does that, I guess it's okay. Like there are things in baseball now, Bob, that we have to kind of learn to accept and understand that it's different than it ever was. And you sit there and go, well, all right. I mean, you can have a guy batting under 200, but still hitting over 40 home runs and having an OPS of, over 800 and gets on base at a 360 clip. I mean, what the hell, man? I guess it's okay.
This is the way I evaluate it. I said, I haven't been thrilled with watching him hit this season, but I also, like I said, it feels better than 168 suggests.
Yeah.
But you look at the entire season, he's sitting there with 731 OPS. If you're going to be that poor defensively and as a corner outfielder, I know there's something to be said for timeliness and clutch factor and things like that, but he has to, his OPS needs to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 to say, okay, this is a net positive. You just the 730 OPS does not carry with that defense in left field.
No, currently. But I'm saying,
No.
like, if he stays on the pace that he's
Yeah.
on, he's
It will
very likely going
climb.
to
Yeah.
very likely going to get over 800 before the
Yeah.
end of the season, and that's what makes it just the whole thing, but just befuddling to me. So anyway, are we ready for one last thing?
Yeah, let's go. We're gonna actually, I think, keep it under an hour today.
Yeah. So here's it. This is going to start off like sounding like I'm being positive, but it's going to skew. You know where it's going to skew.
Yes.
So yesterday, Memorial Day, we got a chance to sit down and relax and watch some baseball, and there was like two really cool moments that happened yesterday. From my perspective, around the league, and one is Mike Soroka finally gets back on the mound after what was it, like I think 1,000 days or something between starts. All the Achilles injuries that he dealt with the Braves. They lost to the A's, which is good for the Phillies, but it was nice to see him get out there. And of course, which is probably the coolest moment of all, was Liam Hendriks getting into a game so soon after cancer treatment, actually pitching for the White Sox yesterday, and the crowd going wild and celebrating Liam Hendriks. And those are great stories, and those are great stories on Memorial Day. But here's my negative. Why were there 8 teams that didn't play on Memorial Day, including the Phillies?
Yeah.
Should that not be an automatic guarantee? Every team has to play on Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, the 3 holidays of the summer. Should not every team in baseball be scheduled to play on those days? It blows my mind that with all baseball is trying to get right, that they can't see that as a thing that they need to do.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. So a couple things on this. I don't know if there was some scheduling restriction, right? Where it's like, oh, they came from here and they're off days in a matter of time. I have no idea. What I do know, though, is just looking at this week, you have Phillies Mets on Thursday at 1 p.m. So just common sense.
Right.
Would you rather have seen that game on Memorial Day, where you have the attention of an entire nation? It's basically off. Or on a throwaway Thursday in the beginning of June? It makes no sense. So is the way that was there some restriction in place that prevented them from playing that game on Monday? Maybe. But then I would tell you, then figure out the rest of the schedule to ensure that that restriction does not interfere.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there was a restriction. I don't know if it was just laziness, an oversight, or what. I mean, it's not an oversight. They're obviously aware enough to know what's going on. And then you would say, all right, wait a minute. The Phillies, though, they were coming up from Atlanta. That trip's not of great significance. So you say, oh, the Mets were coming back from Colorado. That's pretty rough. Who cares?
Yeah.
Who
so
cares?
make it a night game. It doesn't matter if it's
coast to coast. Yeah, play it.
It doesn't have to be a day game. It could be a night game.
And the Mets are at home this weekend, and the Phillies are going down to Washington from New York. It's not like they're ping-ponging across the country here.
I get it.
Yeah,
I understand. Insane. I understand the rules in the CBA as far as travel for players, and the Major League Baseball Players Association really goes all out to make sure that stuff is adhered to, start times match up, so that you're not playing too frequently and having to travel also in the same time. I get all that. Either one of two things has to happen. Either you have to be able to program the computers that crank out your schedules to say, hey, we're going to make this game.
We're playing on Memorial Day. We're playing on the 4th of July. We're playing on Labor Day,
and that's it. Or you put it into the next CBA and say, hey, listen, we're good with all of your requirements, but can we at least agree that these 3 days?
And I mean, as we know, owners and players association, they'll be able to iron that out, no problem. Listen, we're going to require this one caveat. You're cool with that, right?
Right.
We don't have to give you anything in return, do we?
Look, the Phillies last year, they did not play on 4th of July or on Labor Day last year.
I mean, that's insane. Labor Day, I can even go for, to the extent that
it's football season.
Here comes football, college football, right? Like Labor Day weekend's huge for college football. I'm okay with that. 4th of July, that is un-American. 4th of July, that is insane. Memorial Day is crazy. They should have been playing. I agree. It's one of those takes where it's like, it's it's almost so obvious, Anthony, that how could I possibly push back at that? I mean, everyone agrees with you. How many people on Twitter yesterday said, why aren't the Phillies playing today?
I literally, Anthony texted me last night. He's actually not feeling well, and he was like in bed all day, and he got up late and he's kind of stumbling over. He's on his couch and he's texting me at like 7:00, and he's like, "The Phillies aren't playing tonight." Like, no, they're not. And he said to me, he said, wait, what the hell was he watching? The text was cracking me up. He's like, I'm stuck watching World's Most Dangerous Snakes. I'm like, seriously? That's what I'm stuck watching. Until the basketball game came on. So anyway, so that's
all right. Well, yeah, I'm with you on that one. If that's your old man yells at cloud moment of the day, then I stand with you on this.
Thank you. Hopefully the rest of baseball does. The best baseball fans do too.
All right, well, a little bit of a quicker turnaround for us this week. We'll be back on Friday after this Mets series, breaking it all down, looking ahead to the weekend. For Anthony Sanfilippo, I'm Bob Wankel. Make sure that you're following us on YouTube. Check us out there, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that you get your shows. You can follow us on Twitter as well. You can follow the show at Up Phillies. You can follow Anthony at Ant Sanfil. You can follow me at Bob Wankel CB, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks for listening.